But yeah, we're going to talk a little bit about testing in JavaScript. This is probably the first introduction. With the React Redux project, they have you writing some tests in Jest for React, which is a little bit more advanced than what we're going to discuss here. We'll go over a unit test, writing a function with Jest. And I think this will help ramp you up to what you have to do in the Redux project. And then when we get into the back end for the rest of the course, because right now, like with the React Redux, it's still a front end, like capstone culmination of all your efforts learning JavaScript on the front end up until this point. And then the rest of the course is going to be focused on back end JavaScript with Node and Express. So yeah, so testing in JavaScript. So the goals for today is just to understand what it is, why it's important, learn, think about a few various types of tests, but mostly we'll focus on unit tests, which happens to be like the bulk of the testing in an application. And we're going to recognize why it's important and this whole concept behind test-driven development. And we'll get into this red-green workflow or cycle. And then, gain the ability to read what a test tells us when it fails, and then how to go about writing code to pass the test. So how up until this point do we know if our code works? Like, what have we done? Like, what are some things that we've done in our project? Like if we're writing in a function or something like that, like per pixel art project, for example. Feel free in the chat, or if you want to
just testing it by hand.
Yeah, exactly. So like console log, loading it in the browser, clicking around, and probably from what you gathered from doing that is it's kind of a pain in the butt, right? It's like for example, with Dinosaurs project, you had to fill out the whole form that you were a human, and then you had to hit enter, and then it, ran the program and created the dino tiles. And, even like with the UDAS eraser, that's like you have to wait for the counter to count down and then see if things worked. So it was very time consuming, wasn't very efficient. And you didn't really know if just by looking at it and clicking around, if things were working exactly how you wanted it to work. So let's see. So yeah, so that's where it comes into testing, is like a programmatic way, right? We're going to use like a framework, kind of like how we're using, well, React is considered more like a library, but like we're going to use a testing framework called Jest, which has what's referred to as an assertion library. And it's going to give us the tools to adequately and like automatically run a script that will run our functions and see if we get the expected values that we want from that function. So it's a way to continue to add new features without breaking what happened before. So that probably has happened. I know it's happened to me when working on projects. When I'm not using testing, is like I'll add something and then it's like I'll come back to the next day and something else doesn't work. And it's like, oh man, that's, and then maybe I'll get to a point where I'm starting over and then it feels like I wasted a lot of time. So hopefully if you get in the habit of testing, you avoid things like that, catastrophes like that. So what is a test, right? Has anybody in here tried to test themselves or wrote a test? We've all taken tests, right? It's kind of part of life. So test, like to see what you're made of, right? So, but how do you know when you're tested enough, right? Bob Dylan has a song, how many roads must a man walk down before he's a man, right? And the answer is blowing in the wind, right? The answer is like, it's never enough, right? So think about, when you think about this type of testing, think about like if you're stretching a rubber band and you want to see its breaking point, the point at which it snaps. In mechanical engineering, they do it a lot with like cars and airplanes. They test airbags by crashing the car. They test wings by putting them to the point where they break and fall off the plane. So we have some sort of expectation for if it's going to work or not. So like and the only way we know if it's going to work under extreme circumstances is if we push it to the point where it fails. So we start at the point where it fails, and then that's a point in which we can, work from, and make progress. So with testing, another way of saying that is like we're validating an opinion. So we have an opinion that the airbag is going to open, that the plane's going to fly, that the rubber band's going to stretch. So let's see, it won't fail or break under circumstances. That's the expectation that, it's not going to break. When we buy a computer, we have an expectation it's going to work, but it's plenty of times I bought a computer and it, like a month later, it stopped working. And when it comes to Apple, it's always good to get Apple Care. So that would probably be my best advice for today. So when we test in code, we're going to define an expectation, like this function is going to return 4 as a sum, or this one's going to multiply 2 numbers together and return a result as such. The page is going to load and the component's going to appear. The components are going to work together and create some sort of desired output. So once we have these expectations, then we can go about validating and making it work. So the failure isn't bad. So like I was saying before, like before we put the plane up in the air or put the car on the road, we want to push it to its extremes, because out there in the environment, we don't know what it's going to encounter. So the more that we can push it to the point of failure until it doesn't fail anymore, then we know that we have like something secure or, worthy of like people using it. So the failure kind of tells us something about what's going on in the code and kind of where we need to go to fix it. I was going to bring up, there was a phrase in Silicon Valley. I'm not sure if it's applicable anymore. You can Google it, but Mark Zuckerberg would say, move fast and break things. So that was like his motto. And there's some people who are now like saying it's no longer applies, but the whole idea there is, a lot of times you'll talk to engineers. Like I think Jack brought up the story, like when he was younger, like they'll take apart lawnmowers or they'll break stuff to like kind of figure out how it works. So it's kind of in that vein. So some vocabulary. Does anybody want to take a stab at TDD, what that is or what that stands for?
It's test-driven development.
Yeah, test-driven development or test-driven design. So yeah, so it's, it's kind of before you have this idea that something works, you have to like test it in every which way, put it through the ringer, assertion. So an assertion it's an expression containing testable logic. So I assert that the function will output 4 when adding 2 and 2 together, something like that, or when adding 2 numbers together. Assertion library. So this gets into like, the different flavors of testing that's out there. So there's Mocha Chai, we're using Jest. So it's a package of assertion functionality, so usually distinct from a testing framework. So Chai is an example. So there's a testing framework, and then there's the assertion library that can work with the testing framework. So Jest is the 2 together. And a testing framework is a library that determines how the tests are organized and executed. So Mocha would be an example of that. And as I said before, the Jest is the library with the framework in one. Red-green testing. So this is
first let the tests fail and then code until it doesn't fail anymore.
Yeah, exactly. So red is like the test fails, and then green is like the test pass. So it's a workflow or a cycle. So we write and fail the test first before we implement or write the function, and then we go into the implementation details and write out the function till the test passes. So unit test. So this is where we just test one function. So the function should have like a single purpose to it. So an object, it's like in isolation. And it just makes sure that the one piece is behaving or doing what we expect it to do. And then integration test.
Integration test means all functions together work as expected, right?
Yeah, exactly. So like so one function might work and pass the test by itself, but then when we put it together with other functions, we expect they work in harmony, and an integration test will help us test for that. Okay, let's see. So kind of as I was mentioning earlier, the bulk of the tests are probably going to be unit tests. So we're testing one function, making sure it behaves that way. And let's see here. Integration test is an interaction between two or more units working together as they're supposed to. So what are some benefits of testing? So it's like a safety net to find bugs, right? Because the function, you could test it out in the browser by clicking around, you can console log it, you can run it, but you might not get to all the bugs that might happen just by doing those few tests, like manual tests. Unit and integration tests, it's like you'll see like when we write a test, it's like you provide like this, you write this like string of text where you're describing the test and what your assertion is as far as what the code should do. So it creates like this almost like commenting or like story behind what the program's doing. And it should simplify things. Whereas like, you know, as I mentioned before, like a lot of times the projects, as they get bigger, you can code and code and code, and then you can come back to it one day and it's hard to, you know, it could break. You might have the feeling like you want to start over. So integration tests give us the confidence that everything's working together as a whole. Gestalt, right? I think there's a term in German called Gestalt, which is like the whole. Tests can prevent users from breaking applications. So that ultimately the application is going to be used by people, and you don't always know every situation in which they're going to use it. So kind of want to, which, you know, there's a whole other realm of like user experience where you're getting lots of user feedback. So, you know, that's a whole other bowl of wax, but you know, you have an input field where people are putting in text and they can put anything in it, right? Maybe sometimes things that are malicious. So what is test-driven development? So we kind of went over that in the vocabulary. The basic premise is we write the test before we actually write the function. And the test is almost like it's going to call the function. And then we follow this red-green cycle, which we went over. So once the tests are passing, you can then refactor your code and find more optimizing solutions. So you kind of get to like one solution where it passes, and then you can kind of go back and refactor. So what's the purpose of, you know, failing the tests before we write the code to pass?